Success has a strange way of revealing who people truly are. When you dedicate every waking hour, every ounce of energy, and every quiet dream to building something from nothing, you believe your own family will stand beside you. You believe they will protect what you've created, nurture it, and help it grow. But sometimes, family can be the sharpest knife in your back. And before we begin, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what comes next. My name is Jennifer Mitchell, and for years I lived in the shadows, quietly building a future no one else could see. What began as a small phone repair shop my father ran on the corner of a strip mall became the foundation of something far greater. While others dismissed it as a dead-end business, I saw potential hidden in plain sight. I poured my knowledge into creating a mobile app that small shops everywhere could use to survive and thrive. It was simple, practical, and powerful. And soon, it spread like wildfire. But here's the thing, no one tells you about success. It doesn't just attract customers and investors. It awakens jealousy. It breeds resentment in the very people who should be proud of you. The day my own sister stood before a crowd of our business partners, my father smiling proudly beside her and declared that I was no longer needed. That was the day I realized blood doesn't always mean loyalty. What happened next would shock everyone who thought they had written me off. Because I wasn't about to walk away quietly, not from the empire I had built, not from the dream I had sacrificed everything for. Stay with me, because this story is about betrayal, power, and the kind of revenge no one ever sees coming. When people see success, they often imagine privilege, luck, or some golden opportunity falling into place. What they don't see are the sleepless nights, the silent tears, and the sacrifices made behind closed doors. For me, success wasn't handed down like a family heirloom. It was carved out of broken glass and bleeding hands. I grew up in a house where silence carried more weight than words. My father, William Mitchell, poured his pride into his tiny phone repair shop. It barely made enough to pay the bills, but to him, it was a legacy. My mother, Helen, was the quiet presence that held everything together, even as she watched him favor my sister Fiona over me at every turn. Fiona was the shining star, the golden child, straight A's, scholarships, a future carved out in the world of high finance. Meanwhile, I was the girl with grease under her nails, hunched over broken phones late into the night, convinced that there had to be something more. I still remember Fiona's words whenever she visited from her elite business school. "Jennifer, why waste your time here? You're too smart to be stuck in Dad's dusty shop. Aim higher, do something that matters." She never understood that I was aiming higher, that I saw potential hidden in those cracked screens and dead batteries. To her, I was small. To me, I was building the foundation of something far greater. College wasn't glamorous for me. I didn't attend fancy networking events or wear tailored suits to internships at Fortune 500 companies. I commuted from home, splitting my time between classes in computer science and hours at the repair shop. I ate cold leftovers on a workbench littered with tiny screws and shattered glass. My friends were the customers who trusted me to revive their phones when no one else could. Every cent I earned went into buying used phones, tearing them apart, and studying how they worked. Nights blurred into mornings. I'd code for hours, teaching myself to design something better, an app that could help small shops like ours keep track of repairs, parts, and payments. I didn't have investors. I didn't have connections. I had only an old laptop, borrowed textbooks, and stubborn determination. When the first version of my app finally ran without crashing, I cried alone in my bedroom. No one else even knew what I had done. My father barely noticed. He would glance at me sometimes with a faint smile, but then he'd go back to praising Fiona's achievements. "She's going places," he'd say. "She'll bring honor to this family." As if what I was doing, bleeding into every line of code, surviving on 4 hours of sleep, living off instant noodles, was nothing more than a distraction. But the turning point came when one of our regular customers, a small local shop owner named Mr. Patel, asked me how I managed to keep track of all our repairs without losing track of invoices. I hesitated, then showed him my app. His eyes lit up. "Can I use this for my store?" he asked. That was the moment I realized my idea wasn't just a dream. It could change lives. Word spread slowly. A few shops, then a dozen. The app wasn't perfect. It crashed. It glitched. It froze when too many people used it. But it worked well enough to save these small stores time and money. And in their gratitude, I saw something my father never gave me: validation. Still, the cost was brutal. I worked 14-hour days, splitting my body between repairing phones in the front of the shop and coding in the back. My friends stopped inviting me out because I was always too busy. My grades slipped, and my professors warned me I was burning out. My mother would quietly bring me dinner, her soft voice urging me to rest. But I couldn't stop. Not when I finally felt like I had something worth fighting for. When Fiona returned from New York one summer, she looked around the shop with disdain. I still remember her perfectly polished nails tapping against the counter as she said, "Jennifer, you look exhausted. All this for some little app? Do you really think anyone cares?" I bit my tongue so hard it nearly bled. Because people did care. The shop owners who could finally breathe because of my software cared. The students using my free trial version to run side hustles cared. But Fiona only saw numbers, prestige, and image. The cruelest part was that Dad sided with her. When she bragged about her internships and corporate mentors, his chest swelled with pride. When I tried to show him the app's progress, he would nod politely and say, "That's nice, Jen, but maybe you should listen to your sister. She knows the business world. Do you know what it feels like to work yourself to the bone, only to be told you'll never be enough? To stay up until dawn debugging a line of code, only to watch your sister walk into the room and steal every ounce of attention you've been starved for?" I learned to swallow my pain in silence. Every rejection, every dismissive smile, every moment of being overshadowed, I turned it all into fuel. If they wouldn't believe in me, I would build something so undeniable that they'd have no choice but to see me. Years passed like that. I graduated, barely, with a degree in computer science. By then, my app had grown from a handful of users to hundreds. I reinvested every cent into improvements, servers, and marketing. I slept on the office floor, coding until my fingers cramped. My friends started families, traveled the world, posted photos of their glittering lives on social media. I kept my head down, working, waiting, building. The app reached its first 1,000 downloads, then 10,000, then 100,000. Small businesses across the country were using something I had created in the shadows. I should have been celebrating, but instead, I was still fighting for acknowledgement in my own home. At family dinners, Fiona would boast about her promotions and contacts in New York, while Dad listened with pride. When I mentioned my app had just been featured on a tech blog, he waved it off as a nice little project. My chest burned with silent rage. I wanted his approval more than I wanted the money, more than I wanted the success. But it never came. And somewhere deep inside, a part of me hardened. I realized I didn't need it anymore. The world outside my family saw me, believed in me, paid for what I created. That was enough to keep going. That was enough to prepare me for the betrayal that would come later, the betrayal that nearly broke me, until I remembered every night, every tear, every moment of being told I was worthless. Those years of struggle became my armor, and when the time came, that armor saved me. They say success changes people, but in my case, it didn't change me. It revealed me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just the quiet girl in the back of a dusty phone shop. I was the founder of something real, something powerful, something too big to ignore. The app I had once coded on an old laptop in my bedroom was now installed on hundreds of thousands of devices across the country. From small neighborhood phone stores to rising retail chains, people were using my software to track repairs, manage parts, and handle payments. Every time I logged in to check the analytics and saw the numbers climbing, I felt like I had proven myself a little more. Investors came knocking. At first, I hesitated. I remembered the long nights, the way my family doubted me, and I didn't want to lose control of what I had built. But I realized I needed resources to take it further. So I struck deals carefully, never giving away too much. My decisions were cautious, but they paid off. Within 5 years, what had begun as one woman's idea turned into a company valued at over $50 million. My days were long, but they were no longer filled with exhaustion and doubt. I had an office in the heart of the city, a team of brilliant developers who respected me, and clients who trusted me. Industry magazines started writing about Jennifer Mitchell, the woman who changed the game for small tech businesses. I was invited to panels, conferences, and startup competitions. Every time I walked onto a stage, I remembered the girl who once ate cold noodles at a workbench while her sister laughed at her dreams. People looked at me differently now. Investors listened when I spoke. Competitors watched carefully, trying to copy what I had built. And my inbox was always full of opportunities, from partnerships to expansion deals. I had finally stepped out of the shadows and into the light. But success has its shadows too, and mine came in the form of my sister, Fiona. For years, she had stayed in New York, climbing her corporate ladder, earning praise from my father for every promotion. She rarely asked about me, rarely visited, except to make a passing comment about how cute my little project was. But once the company crossed its first million in annual revenue, she suddenly became interested. She started calling more often. "Jen, you've done well, but imagine what you could achieve with real business expertise. You need someone who understands strategy, branding, scale." Her words sounded helpful on the surface, but I knew better. Fiona never asked questions unless she wanted something. And then, one evening at a family dinner, she made her move. "I've decided it's time to come back home," she announced with that confident smile of hers. "With my business background and Jennifer's technical skills, we could really take this company to the next level." My father's eyes lit up instantly. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Jennifer, isn't that great? Your sister wants to help you." Help me. That's what he called it. Help. as though I hadn't already built this from nothing, as though she was swooping in like a savior, when in reality, she was circling like a vulture. Still, I swallowed my pride. I agreed to share the role of CEO, convincing myself that maybe it could work. That maybe, just maybe, my father would finally see us as equals. But deep down, I felt the old wounds reopening. Because for all my success, for all the headlines, the investors, the clients, I was still the girl craving my father's recognition. And Fiona knew exactly how to use that against me. What I didn't know then was that she wasn't coming to help. She was coming to take everything. Fiona's return wasn't quiet. It never could be. She swept into the company like she was walking down a runway, heels clicking against the marble floor of our office lobby, smile gleaming like she owned the place. And in a way, she did. At least, that's how our father, William, made it feel. From the moment she reappeared, he treated her not as someone joining the company, but as someone destined to lead it. He introduced her to employees with a pride I had longed to see directed at me. "This is my daughter Fiona," he'd beam. "She studied business at one of the best schools in the country, worked in New York, managed corporate portfolios. She's here to help us grow." Help. That word again. As if the company wasn't already thriving. As if 50 million in revenue, international clients, and national recognition were somehow just a warm-up act until Fiona arrived. At first, I tried to welcome her. I told myself she was my sister. That maybe, despite our differences, we could combine our strengths. I focused on development and operations, the areas I excelled in. Fiona took on marketing and investor relations, where her polished presence seemed useful. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to hope. But hope, I would soon learn, was dangerous. Fiona was a master of appearances. She knew how to charm people, how to say just enough to impress without revealing how little she truly understood. At conferences, she would stride onto stages with flawless confidence, giving speeches about our company vision, sprinkling buzzwords like glitter, while the innovations she boasted about had come from my team. She accepted awards, posed for magazine covers, and smiled into cameras as though the empire was hers alone. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. Let her have the spotlight. I still had the substance, the products, the clients, the results. But slowly, I realized her shadow was spreading. She began excluding me from key meetings. At first, it was small things, an investor lunch here, a networking dinner there. Then, entire strategy sessions happened without me even knowing. I'd find out through whispered conversations in the hallway or congratulatory emails from people I hadn't even spoken to. When I confronted her, she would smile sweetly. "Oh, Jennifer, I didn't think you'd be interested. It was just high-level business talk. You're so good at the technical side. I didn't want to waste your time." Waste my time. The company I had built, the product I had created, was suddenly a playground where my contributions were seen as menial tasks, while hers were elevated as visionary leadership. And Dad? He encouraged it. "Fiona has a natural gift for leadership," he said one evening after she had dazzled a room full of investors. "You should learn from her, Jennifer. She knows how to carry herself." His words cut deeper than any knife. I had sacrificed my youth, my health, my friendships for this company, and yet in his eyes, I was still the quiet, lesser daughter. The one who tinkered in the shadows. Fiona was the star. The more control she took, the more suffocated I felt. Contracts were signed without my review. Marketing campaigns launched without my approval. Developers I had mentored for years began reporting directly to her, dazzled by her charisma. And when problems arose, she would shift the blame subtly in my direction. Jennifer's team needs to improve efficiency. Jennifer's systems are outdated, always said with a smile, always framed as constructive. But slowly, her narrative seeped into the company culture. I became an outsider in my own creation. The breaking point came with my father's 60th birthday party. It was Fiona's idea, of course. She booked the grand ballroom at one of the city's most expensive hotels, inviting every major client, investor, and business partner we had. On the surface, it was a celebration of our father's life and the company's success. But in reality, it was her stage. I should have known. The night glittered with chandeliers and champagne flutes. Fiona worked the room like a politician, her laughter ringing across the hall, her arm looped through Dad's as though she was already his chosen successor. I stayed in the background, as I often did, greeting guests, making sure everything ran smoothly. Then, during dinner, Fiona rose to make a toast. She clinked her glass, her voice carrying with practiced elegance. I expected a speech about Dad, about family, maybe even about the company's journey. Instead, she dropped the bomb that shattered everything. As we celebrate my father's 60th birthday, she began, I think it's time to announce some important changes at Mitchell Technologies. The board has agreed that for the company to continue thriving, it needs unified leadership. Effective immediately, I will be taking over as sole CEO. The room went silent, then erupted in murmurs. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. Board meetings? What board meetings? Fiona's eyes met mine, glittering with triumph. For too long, we've been held back by outdated thinking and resistance to change. Some people are better suited to technical roles than leadership. Jennifer has done an adequate job maintaining our systems, but to truly compete, we need vision. We need excellence. And frankly, Jennifer simply isn't cut out for this level of business. Her words sliced through me, each one deliberate, each one crafted to humiliate. I turned to my father, silently begging for him to defend me, to say something, anything. But he only nodded along, pride radiating from his face as though Fiona's betrayal was his dream come true. My mother stared at her plate, her hands trembling, unable to meet my eyes. And then came the final dagger. The truth is, Fiona said, her voice rising, Jennifer has become a liability. Her old-fashioned ideas and lack of proper business education hold us back. It's time for her to step aside gracefully. Hundreds of eyes turned toward me, waiting. Pity, scorn, judgment, all etched into their faces. Everything I had built, every sacrifice I had made, was being stripped away in public, with my own family's approval. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the marble floor like a gunshot. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply picked up my purse, walked to my father's table, and placed a small, wrapped box in front of him. Happy birthday, Dad, I said quietly. Then I walked out of the ballroom, head high, leaving behind whispers, stares, and the taste of betrayal burning on my tongue. But as I drove home that night, one thought echoed louder than the humiliation. They thought I was finished. They thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming next. The night of the party replayed in my mind like a broken record. Every cruel word Fiona had thrown, every approving nod from my father, every pair of eyes filled with judgment, it all clung to me like smoke I couldn't wash off. But beneath the sting of humiliation, something colder began to stir. It wasn't despair. It wasn't grief, it was focus. When I arrived home, I didn't collapse in tears. I sat at my desk, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. Around me, the walls were covered in framed patents, awards, and certificates, all with my name on them. Proof that I wasn't worthless, no matter what Fiona had said. And yet, in that ballroom, they had acted like none of it mattered. I leaned back in my chair, letting the anger steady me. If Fiona wanted a war, she would have one. But before striking, I needed clarity. I needed to test the ground, to investigate what had been happening behind my back. The first thing I did was pull up the company's internal documents. I had always kept meticulous records, a habit born from years of working alone. My login still worked. Apparently, they hadn't locked me out yet. Rookie mistake. As I combed through board meeting minutes, I noticed something strange. Dates that didn't match my calendar. Decisions that had been voted on without my knowledge. Clauses slipped quietly into contracts, giving Fiona increasing control over public communications, investor relations, and even hiring approvals. Each page I scrolled made my stomach tighten. This wasn't a spontaneous coup. It had been planned for months. Maybe longer. I opened the folder labeled Board. The signatures glared back at me. Dad's flowing script, Fiona's neat cursive, and the names of outside advisors she had brought in. My name, of course, was missing. It was a theater performance carefully staged to make it look legitimate, but legitimacy and legality were not the same thing. I dug deeper. Our incorporation documents, share distribution records, investment agreements, and then there it was, buried under folders no one bothered to check. The contract from 3 years ago, when Dad had sold me part of his shares in a rush to raise capital. I remembered that day vividly. Fiona had been receiving an award in New York, and Dad was too distracted to read the paperwork carefully. He had signed everything over to me without question. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. Now, I realized the truth. I wasn't just a co-founder. I was the majority shareholder. 51%, the controlling interest. My lips curved into a slow, deliberate smile. They had forgotten. In their arrogance, in their rush to crown Fiona Queen, they had overlooked the one person who actually held the throne. But raw ownership wasn't enough. Fiona had wormed her way into the board, charmed investors, dazzled the press. She had the narrative on her side. If I stormed in shouting, "I own this place," it would look petty, desperate. I needed to test the waters first, to see who was truly loyal and who was waiting to jump ship. So, I began sending messages. At 3 a.m, while the city slept, I drafted emails to our biggest clients, the ones with contracts that included loyalty clauses. These clauses weren't standard. They had been added because of me, because those clients trusted me personally, not the company brand. I explained carefully what had happened at the party, how leadership had changed, how I was no longer in control. I didn't ask them to leave. I didn't have to. All I asked was one question. Would you still trust Mitchell Technologies without me? By dawn, replies began trickling in. Some were cautious, others blunt. If you're gone, Jennifer, we're gone too. We signed because of you, not them. Tell us where you go, and we'll follow. Each message was a spark, lighting up the darkness that Fiona had tried to trap me in. She thought she had humiliated me into silence. Instead, she had given me the perfect excuse to rally my allies. But allies weren't only outside the company. Inside, too, there were people watching closely. My developers, my engineers, the ones I had mentored since their first internships. They weren't loyal to Fiona's glossy speeches. They were loyal to the late-night pizza orders, the endless bug fixes, the way I had stood beside them when projects failed and celebrated with them when they succeeded. I tested their loyalty quietly. A message here, a whispered conversation there. If things changed, if leadership shifted again, where would your trust lie? Their answers were clear. My team was mine. Fiona might have charmed the investors, but I had the builders. Still, I wasn't reckless. I knew I needed proof, leverage, undeniable facts that would crush Fiona's narrative. So, I turned my attention to the company's licensing agreements, and there, tucked in the fine print, lay my hidden weapon. The app, the software that generated 80% of our revenue, wasn't actually owned by Mitchell Technologies. It was licensed by my own separate company. My company. And the renewal date? Tomorrow. A laugh escaped my lips, sharp and bitter. Fiona had stood in front of that ballroom declaring me irrelevant, calling me outdated, worthless. And yet, the empire she claimed as hers was balanced on a contract she hadn't even noticed. One that I controlled completely. The test was over. The investigation complete. The results were in. Fiona had the spotlight, but I had the foundation. Without me, there was no company. Without me, everything she had stolen would crumble to dust. As the sun rose over the city, painting the skyline in gold, I drafted one final document. Not an email this time, but a plan. A plan to remind my family, my employees, and the entire industry of one undeniable truth. I wasn't finished. I wasn't defeated. And when the time came, I wouldn't just take back what was mine. I would make them regret ever thinking I could be erased. The days following the birthday party felt like living in two different worlds. In public, Fiona sparkled, giving interviews, shaking hands, parading herself as the sole visionary behind Mitchell Technologies. She posted carefully staged photos on social media, the golden daughter reclaiming her rightful place. My father glowed at her side, basking in the reflected pride. But behind closed doors, in the silence of my home office, I was building something far more dangerous than an image. I was gathering ammunition. The first weapon was already mine, the majority shareholding. 51%. It sounded like a shield, but I knew it had to be more than that. Fiona was cunning, and she had the board wrapped around her finger. If I came forward with nothing but the claim of ownership, she would spin it as desperation. Jennifer is clinging to the past, she would say. She's trying to hold us back. No, I needed more. I needed facts that couldn't be twisted, signatures that couldn't be denied. So I dug deeper. I spent hours combing through old files, the ones buried in forgotten folders on our shared servers. Meeting minutes, email chains, contract drafts. Patterns began to emerge, tiny threads Fiona thought no one would notice. She had been laying the groundwork for months, maybe years, manipulating narratives and quietly consolidating power. The charm she displayed at dinners and conferences was just the surface. Underneath, she had been ruthless, calculating, erasing me piece by piece. I highlighted inconsistencies, contracts signed without my authorization, despite clauses requiring joint approval. Marketing budgets funneled into pet projects with no ROI. Clauses granting her decision-making powers that weren't legal under our incorporation documents. Individually, they were small. Together, They painted a picture. Fraud. But I didn't stop there. I turned my attention to the software licensing agreements. My separate company, Innovate Apps, still held the ownership of the platform that generated 80% of Mitchell Technologies' revenue. The contract renewal had quietly expired, just as I had planned. The servers, the source code, the update pipeline, they were all mine. The company only held a license to use them, and that license no longer existed. To make it airtight, I had the original agreements notarized, contracts bearing signatures from both my father and Fiona. There it was, in black and white. Mitchell Technologies had no legal claim to the software without my consent. Still, leverage wasn't enough. I needed loyalty. So I began speaking carefully to those who mattered most. The developers, the engineers, the ones who built the product day in and day out. I didn't tell them the full story, not yet. Instead, I asked simple questions. How do you feel about the company's direction? Do you believe in Fiona's leadership? The answers were predictable: frustration, distrust. They saw the same things I did. Fiona cared more about appearances than innovation. And without innovation, they had no purpose. I compiled their responses quietly, documenting each conversation. When the time came, I wouldn't stand alone. The next step was clients. The loyalty clauses I had slipped into contracts years ago were my hidden ace. I reached out directly, explaining the changes in leadership. I didn't beg them to stay with me. I simply gave them a choice. Follow Fiona's glossy image, or follow the person who had built the technology they relied on. Their responses poured in, supportive, firm, loyal. Many invoked their termination rights immediately, contracts dissolving like sand through fingers. Each time an email arrived, I saved it, printing a hard copy and storing it in a locked folder. Evidence that Fiona's empire was already crumbling. One night, while scrolling through archived communications, I found something unexpected. An email chain between Fiona and an investor, dated months before her return. In it, she had promised control of certain company shares she didn't even own yet. She had been selling influence she didn't possess. Fraud again. I saved every word. The picture was clear. Fiona wasn't just ambitious. She was reckless. She had cut corners, forged alliances on lies, and underestimated me completely. Meanwhile, at headquarters, whispers began to spread. Employees noticed me visiting late at night, carrying folders and plugging into servers. They saw developers stopping by my office more frequently. They noticed when certain clients suddenly terminated contracts. Fiona, blinded by her own spotlight, didn't see it. Or maybe she refused to. My mother noticed, though. She came to see me one evening, her eyes red from worry. "Jennifer," she whispered, "what are you planning?" I looked at her hands trembling against a cup of tea, and for a moment, I softened. "I'm doing what I have to," I told her. "They tried to erase me, Mom. I won't let them." She nodded slowly, sadness clouding her gaze. She knew there was no turning back. By the end of the week, my evidence folder was thick. Contracts, emails, licensing agreements, client terminations, staff testimonies, all neatly organized, undeniable. Enough to dismantle Fiona's facade piece by piece. The final test came when I drafted a formal notice. It was simple, clinical, devastating. Effective immediately, Innovate Apps revokes Mitchell Technologies' license to operate its core software platform. Any continued use will be considered a breach of intellectual property rights, enforceable by law. I didn't send it yet. Not until the right moment. Timing was everything. Instead, I placed the notice on top of my evidence folder, stared at it for a long moment, and let the weight of it sink in. I wasn't just fighting for recognition anymore. I was fighting for survival. Fiona thought she had humiliated me into silence. My father thought he had chosen the stronger daughter. But neither of them understood. I had been preparing for this my entire life. Every sleepless night, every condescending remark, every dismissal had taught me how to endure, how to wait, how to strike only when victory was certain. Now, with evidence in hand and loyalty on my side, I was ready. The trap was set. All that remained was to watch them walk straight into it. The folder of evidence sat on my desk like a loaded weapon. Each page was a bullet, each signature a blade. But evidence without execution is powerless. If I wanted to reclaim what was mine, I needed more than proof. I needed a strategy, a precise plan to dismantle Fiona's empire piece by piece until she had no stage left to stand on. I started by asking myself one question. What did Fiona value most? The answer came instantly. Image. She lived for appearances, for admiration, for the illusion of control. Strip that away, and she would crumble. So the plan would unfold in 3 parts: the clients, the employees, and the board. First, the clients. Their loyalty clauses were my secret weapon. They had already begun sending termination notices, but it wasn't enough to let them trickle in quietly. I needed a wave, a public rupture no one could ignore. So I drafted a coordinated announcement. At precisely the same hour, our top clients would release statements ending their contracts with Mitchell Technologies, citing a loss of trust in leadership. I would not appear in those statements, not yet. Let Fiona scramble, let her try to patch the sinking ship while the world watched. Second, the employees, developers, engineers, designers, the lifeblood of the company. I had spoken to them, tested their loyalty. Now I asked for their commitment. Not rebellion, not sabotage, just silence. When the contracts collapsed and Fiona demanded answers, they would quietly hand in resignations and walk straight into Innovate Apps. My company, my sanctuary. Fiona could keep her glossy office and golden titles, but without the builders, she would be nothing but an empty shell. Third, the board. The same group that had applauded her power grab. I would face them last, not with anger, but with undeniable fact. I would present the contracts, the ownership documents, the licensing agreements, and when they realized the truth, that Fiona had been parading around as CEO of a company stripped of its product, its clients, and its people, they would have no choice but to abandon her. Timing was everything. A premature move could give Fiona time to spin the narrative. Too late, and she might consolidate more power. So I studied the calendar. Investor meeting, Monday at 9 a.m.? Perfect. A stage big enough for her to gloat, and for me to shatter her illusions. But even the best plans require rehearsals. Over the weekend, I tested every step. I simulated what Fiona might say, how she might attack. Jennifer is bitter. Jennifer is unstable. Jennifer is jealous. For every accusation, I wrote down a counter, backed with evidence, contracts, emails, testimonies, cold, hard facts. And yet, even as I plotted, doubt crept in. Late at night, staring at the city lights outside my window, I wondered if I had gone too far. This wasn't just business. It was family. My father's approval, my mother's silence, my sister's betrayal, all tangled into the same knot of pain. If I went through with this, the damage would be permanent. There would be no going back. But then, I remembered that night in the ballroom. Fiona's voice dripping with false sympathy. My father nodding along as though my humiliation was a gift. Jennifer is a liability. Jennifer is worthless. No, I couldn't forget. I wouldn't forgive. On Sunday evening, I made the final preparations. The coordinated client announcements were scheduled. My employees had their resignation letters ready. The legal notice revoking the software license was drafted, dated, signed. The evidence folder was neatly organized, every page cross-referenced. I packed it into a sleek leather case and set it by the door. Before going to bed, I called my mother. She answered in a hushed voice, as though afraid someone might overhear. "Mom," I said quietly, "tomorrow, things will change." There was silence on the line, then a trembling sigh. "Do what you have to, Jennifer. Just don't lose yourself in the process." Her words echoed in my mind long after I hung up, but I pushed them aside. I had already lost enough. The next morning, I woke before dawn. My suit was pressed, my case polished, my mind sharp. As I walked into the headquarters of Mitchell Technologies, employees glanced at me with something different in their eyes. Not pity, not doubt. Something closer to anticipation. Fiona was already in the conference room, radiant as ever, greeting investors with her flawless smile. My father stood beside her, proud, oblivious. They looked at me with thinly veiled irritation as I took a seat at the far end of the table, silent, watchful. The meeting began with Fiona's performance. Charts, projections, promises. She spoke of growth, innovation, leadership, as though she had invented it all. The investors nodded, scribbling notes, charmed by her confidence. And then, right on cue, the first phone buzzed. An investor frowned, reading an email. Then another. And another. Confusion rippled through the room. Fiona paused, her smile faltering. "What's happening?" she demanded, her voice sharp. One of the investors cleared his throat. "It seems several of your largest clients have just terminated their contracts, effective immediately." The room erupted in whispers. Fiona's face drained of color. She looked at me, panic flickering behind her polished mask. I leaned forward, folding my hands calmly on the table. "Perhaps," I said softly, "this is the right moment to discuss the future of Mitchell Technologies." The trap had sprung, and the real battle was only beginning. The silence in the conference room was suffocating. Fiona's perfect presentation, slides polished, graphs colorful, voice confident, had just been shredded by a single wave of emails. Investors scrolled frantically on their phones, whispering to each other, their faces shifting from confusion to suspicion. Fiona tried to recover. She laughed lightly, though her voice cracked. "This is just a temporary hiccup. A misunderstanding, I assure you. Our clients are fully committed to us." "Committed?" I repeated, my voice calm, cutting through the murmurs. I opened the leather case beside me and placed a thick folder on the table. "I believe you should read their exact words." One by one, I slid printed termination notices across the glossy surface. The investors leaned forward, reading. The words were damning: loss of trust, leadership instability, contract terminated. Fiona's hand shook as she snatched one of the letters. Her manicured nails dug into the paper as she skimmed it, her face blanching. This is sabotage," she stammered. "Jennifer is behind this." I tilted my head, unflinching. "You're right. I informed them of the leadership changes. They chose to leave on their own. You see, Fiona, they didn't sign contracts with Mitchell Technologies because of you. They signed them because of me. Gasps filled the room. Fiona's mask cracked further. Her jaw tightened, her eyes glistened with fury. "You've destroyed everything!" she hissed. "No," I said softly, pulling out another document. "You did that yourself." On the screen behind her, I projected the licensing agreement, the one she had overlooked. I highlighted the clause in bold. All intellectual property rights remain under Innovate Apps, owned solely by Jennifer Mitchell. License expires unless renewed with majority shareholder approval. I turned to the board. That license expired last week. Mitchell Technologies no longer has legal rights to operate the platform that generates 80% of its revenue. The words landed like grenades. Investors' faces twisted with shock. My father's smile faltered, his eyes darting between Fiona and me, realization dawning far too late. Fiona's voice rose, shrill, desperate. "You can't do this! This company is ours! Dad's legacy, my legacy!" "Legacy?" My tone sharpened. "You stood in a ballroom and called me worthless. You stripped me of my role, humiliated me in front of clients, colleagues, and family. You tried to erase me from the very company I built. Tell me, Fiona." "What part of that is legacy?" Her face contorted, no longer polished, no longer charming. Sweat beaded on her forehead, her foundation beginning to cake under the harsh lights. She looked less like a leader and more like a cornered animal, her mask of perfection peeling away for everyone to see. I pressed forward. "And let's not forget these." I revealed printed emails, her correspondence with investors where she promised shares she didn't own. Murmurs exploded around the table. "Fraud. Plain and simple. You sold influence you never had." Fiona's composure shattered. Her voice broke into a scream. "You planned this. You waited for the perfect moment to stab me in the back." I stood slowly, towering over her collapse. My voice was steady, steel wrapped in calm. "No, Fiona, I spent 10 years trying to be a good sister while you dismissed me. I built this company while you basked in the spotlight. I never planned revenge until the night you called me worthless. That's when I realized you'd never stop until I was gone. So yes, I fought back, not with lies, with truth." Her chair scraped loudly as she surged to her feet, her face red, her hands trembling. But the investors were no longer looking at her. They were looking at me, at the evidence, at the undeniable reality that Mitchell Technologies without me was nothing. Finally, one of them spoke, his voice cold. "Miss Fiona, I think we've seen enough." My father slumped back in his chair, his face aged years in mere minutes. His eyes were clouded with regret, but it was too late. He had chosen his star, and now that star was burning out before his eyes. Fiona's lips trembled. Her mascara ran in streaks down her cheeks, her once flawless image ruined. She sank back into her chair, head in her hands, shoulders shaking as the truth crushed her. I gathered the remaining documents, stacked them neatly, and looked around the table. "So," I said evenly, "here are the options. Fiona and my father resign, effective immediately. The board acknowledges me as the sole CEO and majority shareholder. Or..." I glanced at the revocation notice, tapping it with one manicured finger. "This company ceases to exist today." The silence was absolute. No one dared argue. And in that silence, Fiona's world, her image, her pride, her so-called destiny, shattered completely. When the board voted, the decision was swift and merciless. Fiona and my father were stripped of authority. Their signatures were removed from official documents. Their power dissolved in a matter of minutes. I became the sole CEO of Mitchell Technologies, and in that instant, the scales shifted permanently. But the true consequences unfolded in the days and weeks that followed. News of the boardroom showdown spread like wildfire. Whispers turned into headlines. CEO ousted in family power struggle. Jennifer Mitchell secures control of tech empire. Reporters clamored for details, hungry for every morsel of drama. For once, the spotlight that Fiona loved so dearly turned on her. But not with admiration, with ridicule, with disdain. Her carefully cultivated image of perfection cracked wide open. Journalists dug into her fraudulent promises to investors, her hollow speeches, her shallow contributions. Former allies distanced themselves overnight, their praise turning into silence. The same magazines that had once crowned her a visionary leader now labeled her a cautionary tale. And the public? They were merciless. Social media mocked her every move. The video clip of her face contorting in rage at the investor meeting went viral. Screenshots of the fraud-laden emails circulated endlessly, dissected and ridiculed. The internet branded her a liar, a parasite feeding off her sister's brilliance. At the office, the collapse was even more brutal. Employees who once smiled politely at her now avoided her gaze. Whispers followed her through the hallways, eyes flicked toward her with thinly veiled contempt. Developers she had dismissed as technical staff walked out in droves, choosing to follow me instead. Her authority had evaporated. She wasn't feared. She wasn't respected. She was irrelevant. And then came the investors. One by one, they withdrew their support, citing lack of confidence in leadership. Fiona had no more meetings to attend, no more stages to stand on, no more cameras pointed in her direction. She had built her identity on the illusion of being admired, and now that illusion had collapsed into ashes. At home, things were no better. My father, once her greatest champion, withdrew into silence. He avoided public appearances, ashamed of the role he had played in her rise and fall. My mother, though gentle, could no longer shield her from the consequences. Fiona had been his golden child, but now she was the daughter who had nearly destroyed everything he had worked for. Her health began to deteriorate. The sleepless nights that once belonged to me now haunted her. Her flawless skin broke under the weight of stress. Her once radiant glow replaced with shadows under her eyes. She lost weight, her sharp suits hanging loosely on her frame, a ghost of the confident woman she had been. The final blow came when Silicon Valley startups, the very ones she had once boasted about joining, rejected her applications. Word had spread too far, her reputation too toxic. No company wanted to hire the woman who had been exposed as a fraud on a public stage. Doors slammed shut, bridges burned. She had gambled everything, her career, her pride, her family's loyalty, and lost. Meanwhile, Mitchell Technologies thrived. Under my leadership, we launched new products, expanded internationally, and restored client trust. The company tripled in value within a year, and my name became synonymous with resilience and innovation. At conferences, people whispered as I passed, not with pity this time, but with respect. That's Jennifer Mitchell, the one who was underestimated, the one who fought back. And Fiona? She faded into obscurity. A woman who once craved the spotlight, now hiding from it. A name that once commanded admiration, now met with disdain. She had become exactly what she had tried to make me feel at that birthday party: worthless. I should have felt triumphant, and in some ways, I did. Watching her unravel was a dark kind of justice. Every sneer, every insult, every attempt to erase me had returned to her tenfold. She had been humiliated, abandoned, destroyed by the very system she had tried to manipulate. But beneath the satisfaction, there was also a sliver of sorrow. Because Fiona was still my sister. And no matter how deeply she had betrayed me, some part of me wished things had been different. That we could have stood side by side, building something together. But betrayal leaves scars too deep to heal. And in the end, Fiona had written her own fate. She had wanted the world to see her as a leader. Instead, the world now saw her as a warning. In the quiet of my new office, sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, painting golden lines across the floor. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to breathe, not with the heaviness of survival, but with the lightness of victory. The company I had built from a corner phone shop was now stronger than ever, thriving under my vision, my choices, my name. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about Fiona, about the look on her face when the truth unfolded, the way her world cracked open. I don't feel anger anymore, only a strange kind of closure. She chose her path, and I chose mine. And though our family ties may never fully heal, I know now that my worth was never theirs to decide. My father eventually stepped away, retreating into a quiet retirement. My mother visits often, her eyes softer now, filled with pride she once kept hidden. And me? I stand taller. Not because of revenge, but because I proved to myself that I was never worthless. I was always more than enough. As I look to the future, I no longer carry the weight of needing approval. Instead, I carry determination to keep building, to keep creating, to ensure no one can ever erase me again. And maybe, just maybe, one day, Fiona will find her own peace too. But until then, my story stands as a reminder. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If you want to hear more stories like mine, don't forget to hit subscribe, because trust me, what comes next will be just as unforgettable.